Hi everyone, welcome back to AFTV. We've got another really exciting interview here because Arsenal, they didn't get over the line for top four. Frustrations, what would have been? What if Partey had been fit? What if Tomiyasu had been our starting right back and performed at the levels we'd seen throughout the rest of the season? What if Tierney, again, injury issues, what if he'd been around for that key part of the season? You think of the 3 defeats to Palace, Southampton, Brighton. There was a lot of frustration around the performances of the team. And I don't think fans made loads of excuses for Arteta on the injury front, because I think throughout a lot of the season, we've actually been okay. But there have been some key players that at key moments have had some pretty, I won't say use the word serious, but they've been out for spells. And so I thought I'd take this opportunity to talk to Dr. Rajpal Brar, who I got here on the screen. Welcome to AFTV. You guys will know Dr. Raj from Twitter, from his amazing work he does on his YouTube channel, all the updates I see personally online, not just in football, in all sorts of sports as well. Dr. Raj, welcome to the channel. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, firstly, thanks for having me. Always appreciate being on here and you taking the time out of your always busy schedule. A little bit about myself, big football fan, big Arsenal fan since I was 8 years old. And, my background is just in sports medicine. It's in fitness, especially with footballers and pro sports. And so I try to just give, some usable insight kind of into what goes on oftentimes behind the scenes and trying to, stay away from some of the big emotional kind of waves that tend to happen when any player even goes down, with the slightest thing. So.
Yeah,
no, I've been trying to do my best at that.
I've appreciated your updates a lot. Sometimes I've noticed there'll be an injury and all we've really got is footage or a picture of what happened. We're waiting for scans, we're waiting for comments from managers, and you're often there just to remind us, well, it looked like he twisted his ankle at this, this level, so likely it's this. And you tend to put a lot of fans' minds at ease, so I thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. With Arsenal, sometimes it's hard because I'm hoping for the best too, right? There's some bias there, but
absolutely,
trying my best to give all the possibilities. And I think at the same time, also trying to, rein in some of the expectations, like that Partey rehab video where everyone went off and was like, "Oh, he'll be back next game." He wasn't back next game, and so just trying to give that perspective.
Yeah, we appreciate that a lot. I mean, as you mentioned, you're a big Arsenal fan.
Yeah.
Just a quick one on how the season's gone for you and how you're feeling about the rebuild and Arteta's project and process and what's to come for Arsenal.
Yeah, overall feeling good. I think the trend lines are there, right? Just starting 11. When the starting 11, I think they only played, the central pivot only played 10 games together. The record there is quite clear. So I think the key thing here is you have to have the depth there to have that starting 11 around for more games, and of course raise the floor, and then of course as Mikel has said, raise the ceiling too with this summer with some of the players they're targeting, and from the early transfer targets it looks to be the case. Of course we know silly season, transfer season, there's lens with everyone, so we'll see what happens, but overall feeling quite good. I think the project is clear. It was never a short-term project. It's a medium and long-term project to allow these guys to grow together. And when they're all hitting their peak, right, hopefully, and you hope, hopefully that's as Liverpool and City are starting to dip as well, right? So you're trying to almost time that up if you can.
Yeah, and I completely agree. You mentioned it yourself, 10 games with our starting back four and goalkeeper. Listen, we had a lot of red cards this season, but we can't put those all down to the discipline issues. Injuries. From when I was a kid, some of my favourite players, Cesc Fabregas misses the Carling Cup final in 2011. Robin van Persie, loved him, always injured. Sami Nasri would pick up a few. Walcott would always pick up a few. Cazorla missed like 2 full years of football. And we found out how serious that was after some time. Injuries and Arsenal have just always been a marriage made in, well, not in heaven for me. It's just been, it's always been a feature of our seasons. I look at this year, and I don't make excuses for Arteta on the injury front. I don't say we didn't get it because of injuries. But I also don't I don't look past it as just it didn't have any impact at all. Let's remind ourselves of the injuries we had, starting with Kieran Tierney. He had a knee surgery, I believe. What happened there?
So they haven't really given much information on the actual surgery. All we
Yeah.
know is that he came back from international duty, and during training he was having some ongoing issues. They did further assessment, and then turned out that he needed a procedure. From my understanding, it's something that he may have been carrying for a little while. And so the question there becomes maybe pulling the reins back on a guy like Tierney a little bit and not allowing him to go on international duty, right? We've seen Jurgen Klopp do that a few times with some of his players and try to pull them back. I think Tierney's the type of guy, and Mikel has said this, he's always going, full out. So he's a guy you might have to just kind of, have that conversation with. And hey, man, you're really, really important to us. So maybe sometimes you have to limit some of his involvement.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go into because I want to go into good detail about the injuries and more, I don't want to be pointing fingers and saying who's to blame, but looking at kind of where the responsibility lies with these kind of things and the management of your body and all that. Before we do, let's remind ourselves of Tomiyasu and Partey's injuries as well. Now, Partey's had a few since he's come at Arsenal. Is this recent one a reoccurrence of injuries he's had in his 2 years at the club?
Recent one being like the one he just picked
up.
Yeah. Made him miss. He had a hamstring. I believe this was a hamstring issue.
Okay.
It wasn't a recurrence, but they're all, interrelated. So just like you said, to kind of review real quick, he had calf injury on one side, re-aggravated it. Then as he was coming back, he re-aggravated the other calf as well. And then he picked up that hamstring injury to end the season.
Okay. And Tomiyasu, again, am I right in thinking Arteta said it was a calf injury and then a different calf injury? And then his calves have been through it.
Yeah. It's not all that unexpected, because when you play through an injury like he did in the Carabao Cup, because Suarez was injured, he had a hip issue, and there's limited depth behind him. He decided, and the team decided, right, there's an acceptable level of risk reward there. And so he came back, re-aggravated that. And then as he was trying to ramp up training, injures the other one. Now, calf injuries can be really, really sensitive. There's so much variation on these. For example, not a Premier League example, but last year, this year, Sergio Ramos for PSG missed 3 months with a grade 1 calf injury, because every time he tried to ramp up, he would feel something, right? So they can be really, really sensitive just because the nature of the calves and how loaded they are during, honestly, when you're walking, the calves are under demand. So imagine when you're playing football and how much load that puts on your calves. And then you have a player like Tomiyasu, who is kind of required to really, go through some of those high burst intensity, has to win a lot of aerials, right? And so I think the big thing, when he injured the other calf, the team just didn't want to see him pick up another injury, which obviously would have knocked him out for the rest of the season, but also would have potentially bled now into his off-season training and preparation as well.
So that's been a big part of it with Tomiyasu, is we could all see he was rushed back against Liverpool, didn't look himself, comes back, plays a few games, injured again against Newcastle. Is this a case of we give him the summer off to really fully get over them and then he should be good to go? Or is it a concern that once you get a calf injury, they can kind of keep creeping back? I mean, how does it work?
Yeah, so once you have any soft tissue muscular injury, this is for anybody. It's the highest predictor of future injury. That's just inherent. You can't really change that. So, but what you can change is how much recovery that player is getting, how much training, strength training that player is getting. And like you said, that recovery and then preparation period over the summer. His hamstring injury, to me, that's a player who had a very, very long time off, then came back into very high intensity games. You're always going to have risks there. And so, when I see a player start to have some of these recurrent soft tissue injuries in season, it's not really all that concerning to me, because when you're in the season and you don't have time to recover or properly really do the training you need, there's going to be more risk than you typically would accept. But at the same time, this is top level football.
Yeah.
The name of the game is playing, right? And it's trying to get those results. So I think to your question, the key is really going to be that off-season summer program.
Sure.
And we saw, not to jump ahead, but with Partey, after he had that off-season program, he didn't pick up a soft tissue injury until late in the season, right? And so the key is really going to be that off-season. So I think that's part of why they're being conservative with him, is to not ruin that off-season preparation as well.
Right, so that's really fascinating, okay, because the reason I would start with Tomiyasu was I can look past it as a recurrence of the same injury or the other calf. And as you said, that one can cause the other. I remember, listen, I've never, ever, ever played high-level sport, but I remember having Achilles problems, and my physio said, you need to stretch your hamstring. I said, no, you're not listening. I've got Achilles problems. He said, but they're all linked. They all play a part, and you need to. So I kind of always thought with Tomiyasu, it's probably just he's not quite getting over the hill with it, and we need to give him that big summer off. But with Partey and Tierney, I feel differently, and this is where I get worried. Partey has no injury problems the whole time he's at Atletico Madrid, as far as I'm aware. Comes to Arsenal, and last season being the 2021 season, plagued by them. So many, 3 weeks here, a month there, 2 months here, whatever. Comes back this season, you're right, actually had an extended spell really from September to January, February, no, longer. Yeah, April. Yeah. Without an injury, but then does pick up another one. What is it that can make a player have so many injuries at one club at one time, when he's been free of them for most of his career?
Yeah, so I think one thing with Partey is that obviously they used the buyout clause on him, right? So he didn't have a full preparation with Arsenal's training staff. He was training, of course, with Atleti, right? But training for the Premier League is a little bit different. We know there's more high intensity bursts every game in the Prem than there is in any other league. And then, right, just acclimating to that intensity always brings along some injury risk. You have multiple managers who talk about, it can take that first season for a player to really adapt physically to that league, whether that means it's injury or whether it just means, that player just physically adapting, right? That's inherent risk. But once he picks up that first injury, there's always going to be that risk for re-injury, especially when you drop him back into a high intensity, NLD, where he then picks up another one. That being said, even last year, he came back and he had a hamstring injury in January. He came back quicker than usual and had no more injuries after that. Right. Even in preseason this past season, he had the high ankle sprain on that poor challenge versus Chelsea, another extended absence. But then coming back off of that, he had no injuries for an extended spell, right? So yes, he's picked up injuries, but there's also times where you might expect him to be out longer or maybe have some knock-on effects, and he hasn't. Yeah. The concern with him is that, as we found out the tail end of the season, like I said before, once you injure a muscle, you're always at increased risk for re-injuring it. And that's what happened in this case. Yeah. And I think that's why they're being, again, very conservative with him, because he, again, picked up that thigh injury. I'm pretty sure it's hip flexor or quadriceps. They haven't put details out on it, but that's just inherent. You're always going to be at risk for that.
Yeah, fair enough. On to Kieran Tierney. I remember when we signed him, there was some talk about him being a fairly injury-prone player. And I want to go into this word injury-prone, especially when I'm talking about Kieran Tierney. What does it mean? Is it fair? Is it just bad luck? Are there players that are just naturally injury-prone? Jack Wilshere, honestly, one of the best young talents I've ever seen at Arsenal, career taken from him by injury. Abu Diaby, but you can maybe relay that to a big injury he had at one point. With these injury-prone players, how much is it just bad luck? How much is it anything else? I don't know. Whatever else it could be.
I mean, honestly, it's typically a combination of things. Just to address Diaby, even Aaron Ramsey, after they both had significant injuries
Yeah,
and long absences, they both then started to have these injury cycles. Why? Your body deacclimates to certain things. Mentally, you might even be, changing the way you move around it. And so that can certainly play a part. Wilshire's case, obviously, he had the ankle issues. He also recently came out and said, and this is a big part of it we don't often take into consideration. He said he wished he had listened more to the physios and taken care of himself and actually done the things that were required. Reese Nelson just had this interview, right, on The Athletic yesterday where he talked about this is the first time he's actually taken care of his body and, done the extra practice, done the health, done the sleep, and done all the other facets. And so it takes a lot of work, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch to be
sure.
healthy and be in optimal playing conditions. What you see on the pitch is really just a symptom of what the person and how they're preparing off of it. And so that's honestly a massive part of it are those habits and those things. Now, in some cases, like in contact injuries, for example, like you get hit, something's going to break oftentimes with enough force. And that's just, bad. That can be bad luck, but that can start that chain of events.
Yeah.
Like an Aaron Ramsey, for example, that then leads to some of these issues. And so the guy, circling back to who you started with, Tierney does concern me for a few reasons. One, he played with Celtic, he played through a pubic injury for like almost a year, right? He pushed through that for like over a year. And so that's always going to lead to knock-on effects. And that it goes back to my point early on about guys playing through injuries and Tierney trying to rein them back in a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So you always have these knock-on effects with guys like that. I think the issue again there is, do you have the appropriate level of depth, to where you can tell Tierney not to play, right? Where the drop-off isn't significant enough, where you can say, hey, we need we can put him in rotation. And so,
Sure.
and still be able to compete in some of these bigger games. Tierney, again, I think the injury history for him is becoming more and more evident that, he's going to miss games every season. And so the question becomes, okay, how do you address that in this case? Because he even had the contact injury, I believe, last season, which wasn't his fault. But still, it's another repeated insult to his body.
Yeah.
And these things add up. And he's played a ton of games as well. And he plays, like I said before, he plays always at the same level of intensity. Doesn't matter if it's training, doesn't matter if it's, a national game, doesn't matter if it's a domestic game. So that's
and he plays in a sorry to cut you, and he plays in a very physically demanding position. You've got to get up and down, you've got to tackle, you've got to create, you're putting your body through a lot. You mentioned something about whether your mind mentally starts to do things differently. I wonder whether that happens subconsciously. Hector Bellerin and Rob Holding around a similar time had ACL injuries, if I'm not mistaken. And I always put those injuries down as the reason why we don't have the Bellerin and Holding we had back then. I remember Holding being a really exciting young up-and-coming centre-back. Bellerin up and down, you felt you couldn't stop him down the right wing. And now I look at them, and I mean this with all the respect in the world, but they don't look as good on the ball. And I almost think it's because they don't look like they can quite move or turn the way they wanted to, or subconsciously they're not. Is that real? Am I just seeing things, or can it be like that?
No, so the research on post-ACL return, there's something called kinesiophobia, which is like the fear of movement or re-injury.
Right.
And the research on kinesiophobia after ACL is actually the most concrete evidence we have about how psychological readiness and preparation affects your ability on the pitch coming off an ACL injury. So it's not just something you're seeing. It's very, very, I think, pertinent. I think Bellerin he had that vlog on YouTube, or I can't remember where it was originally, about his return from the ACL injury. Talked about the mental side many, many times. And I think, especially in the case of a Bellerin, who was a player who relied on his physical traits, right?
Yeah.
Like that speed, having to now adapt, not having that pace and having to now work on his technical game, that can be a very, very hard transition, especially in the Premier League,
Yeah.
where you don't have those margins. In La Liga, you have a little bit more margin to play, right? You do. It's just the nature of the league, and that's with no disrespect. It's just different.
Sure.
I think it's definitely a harder transition for him. With Rob, I think it's definitely harder to say. It's obviously in his case also, he hasn't really had that many consistent run of games,
Sure.
after that. And so it becomes hard to just find a rhythm in that regard as well. I think he was always a player who was going to be somewhat limited, but
Yeah.
it's hard. I think it's harder to say with him. I think it's clearer with Bellerin.
Yeah, absolutely. Raj, you've been fantastic. I just want to ask two sort of final questions.
Yeah.
Mikel Arteta has often been criticised for complaining about fixture schedules. Now, he's not the only one. Jurgen Klopp's done it, Guardiola's done it, Solskjaer's done it, although no longer at Man United. I think Arteta maybe isn't listened to as much because he's the rookie manager, he's new to it, and maybe people feel like Klopp and Guardiola have more of a position to talk. But even they get a lot of heat. Klopp gets a lot of heat for constantly mentioning the fixture schedule. Is there something in this? Is there something that us as fans and maybe the media are missing when it comes to recovery time? And yes, there's an amount of games to fulfill. Yes, there's competitions we love. There's money in the game. There's fans to service, all that. But when Jurgen Klopp's being made to play it on a Tuesday when they could play it on a Thursday, does he have a point? Or is it just a case of, well, you get your recovery time Tuesday to Sunday anyway, so relax?
They do have a point. And I personally, I think they should speak out as much as they can on it because, if you have the possibility of giving guys an extra 24 hours or whatever it is, right, which we know can be significant, especially for teams later on in the season, why not do it? I understand from a scheduling standpoint, if there's no other option, right? But if there are options, why not give the players more rest and not put the onus on them? I mean, we already see for example, during the winter schedule, some of the scheduling is crazy.
Yeah.
And so you have those knock-on effects, post-pandemic with the league going into the summertime with no summer off season or very limited summer off season then, right? You've had these guys playing now up until now this summer. They've been playing nonstop for 2 years?
Yeah.
And now you have a Winter World Cup coming up. So all these things, it's not just about one game. It's about how they all add up over time.
Sure.
So if you have, minus 1 day rest here, minus 1 day rest there, you now multiply that by 10 days, right? Over the course of a season over years. And so that can all add up to a player potentially, getting hurt or not being at their best. And then sometimes fans often complain about how sometimes, mid-season or, some of these games or, their poor performances. And part of that is why players are tired. So it's not just a thing for player injury and protect them, but it's also for the quality of games as well.
Yeah, fair point. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here to round it off. We mentioned those three players, Tomiyasu, Partey. I'm going to take Tomiyasu out of it because we only signed him a year ago, and I think he's been a revelation, actually, despite the injuries, and has played most of the season. We're looking at Partey and Tierney now, and I've heard this a few times from Arsenal fans. Don't replace, keep them, but we need to maybe bring in players of their quality so that we're not relying on if I'm being honest, a drop in quality when they're not available for large parts of the season, which, listen, in the 2 years, 2.5 or 3 years that Tierney's been here, the suggestion is he's not going to be available for a lot of it. Would you be going out and signing first teamers, obviously budget, depending on budgets and what we can do and what priorities are, would you be going and getting first team level players in Partey and Tierney's positions this summer?
I don't think I would do it in Tierney's position. I think Partey, with his skill set, to replace that skill set, you're looking at, an incredibly high valuation number. That to me just isn't feasible.
Sure.
However, with Tierney and considering his injury history, I think that's a more feasible thing to do. And so, I mean, of course, if they can afford number ones, at that kind of that lone 6/8, also, left back as well, great. But to me, Partey's injury history still doesn't concern me all that much. Tierney's, to me, is by far the most concerning. And I think, although he's a great player, I think a lot of the intangibles he brings as well, his competitive spirit, are irreplaceable. To me, his skill set is more replaceable than Partey's is. And so that's kind of what I would target personally.
Absolutely. Well, look, we wish them all the best with their recoveries. We look forward to having them back for the start of the new season. I think I speak for most Arsenal fans when I say we love Kieran Tierney, we love Partey, we love Tomiyasu. The frustration comes from wanting to see them out there. And I credit Tottenham for their good work getting top four, but I do think we'd have got over the line if even just one of them was fit more regularly than they have been this season. So it's a bit of a shame, but it's something that will likely be addressed in some way, shape or form in the summer. Raj, I just want to say a massive thank you. You've been fantastic. I mean, this isn't stuff I could just quickly Google and get all the info I need. You've been amazing. I think Arsenal fans will really appreciate this insight into the wider situation when it comes to Arsenal's injury problems. Just again, remind everyone where they can find you in your work with 3CB Performance.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on YouTube as well, Instagram, TikTok as well. The handle is at 3CB at 3 Charlie Beta Performance. So
amazing.
Look out for videos. Obviously, I'm tweeting all the time, and so appreciate the time.
Well, we'll discuss on Twitter. I'm sure other Arsenal fans will get involved as well, and we'll have some good discussion around it. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed the show. I've learned a lot. I'm sure you guys have. A big thanks to Raj for that, because honestly, I think we needed this wider perspective and understanding of what's going on, because there's a lot of blame culture around injuries and stuff, and I get it. Doesn't mean you don't address it, but maybe it's important we understand. Bellerin, think of some of the heat he's taken at Arsenal. Honestly, I'm not saying it's not all warranted when it comes to performances and stuff, but, getting that insight and understanding into what these injuries can do, the long-term effect, how it affects you going forward, and how maybe you have to adapt your game, I think just gives us an extra layer of perspective as fans. So I've really enjoyed this with Dr. Raj. Hope you guys have too. Get in the comment section, let us know your thoughts, and check out all the content that's coming out this week on AFTV. Big thanks, like and subscribe and all that. See you soon.
Shop for AFTV merch at shop.aftv.co.uk. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Snapchat and Twitch. We've got content for every platform, so check it out.